The environment around Anglesey is breathtaking, where towering cliffs meet native coastal shrubland and the winds continually shape the land itself. It's rich in biodiversity, but also exposed to some of Australia's harshest coastal climate conditions, which means any home designed here needs to be both resilient and deeply connected to its surroundings, using climate-responsive architecture and high-performance insulation to ensure year-round comfort. Welcome to our fireside chat. I'm Janine, and today I'm joined by architect Kim Irons of Stonehouse and Irons Architecture. We're sitting in my home here on the west coast of Victoria, a home I designed and had built to handle everything from coastal winds to summer heat waves. One of the biggest comfort factors in this house is something you can't see, but you feel the experience every day, and that's insulation bats. Today, we'll explore Kim's approach to sustainable building design and why she chooses to use high-quality insulation bats that are Australian-made, and how they can make a difference for energy efficiency and thermal comfort. Welcome, Kim.
Thanks, Janine.
Kim, sustainability is a strong theme in your work. Can you share a project where you had a meaningful environmental impact, particularly where insulation played a role?
One of the projects of the many that we have done in that way is a project we'll see down at Aireys Inlet, where we really pursued sustainability as much as possible. We had a great client who really supported all of that. And so we used insulation through walls, floors and the roof, obviously, to really pursue the most snug and comfortable house we could.
What does designing for community mean to you, and how does insulation fit into that vision?
We really enjoy designing for community, particularly in our community projects. It's a real opportunity to give to a broader client and the public in general. When we're using insulation, we really like to include it to make sure that the environment that they're in is comfortable and warm in winter, cool in summer, but also it helps with the general building operations and affordability of running those sorts of projects, particularly at community where money is tight.
Kim, what are some of the design principles that you explore in your buildings?
Well, certainly what we call passive solar design. So the idea of maximising that northern aspect and sunlight in winter, but shading it in summer, protecting from the east and the west as well. We often need that sunlight, but that's another challenge in itself. Insulation is a big one. It's really the one that's going to keep us going and keep everything as temperate as possible inside the dwelling. But it's one of those aspects too that I say, well, there's no point spending money on heating and cooling if you're not going to put insulation in. There's no point spending money on double glazing if you haven't got insulation in the walls. Really, the insulation is the fundamental thing we've got to get in there before we sort of start doing all of the other bells and whistles that we may layer on.
And it's certainly the lowest, the lowest hanging fruit, really, isn't it?
Oh, it's the most affordable thing you can do. It's so economic. Is just so effective because that's 25 to 30% of your energy disappearing up through the roof. Janine, so we're in your house. What considerations did you take when you were doing this design?
We're constrained in this area because we've got bushfire attack level in this region. In this locality, I had to design the home to a bushfire attack level of 29, which is in the mid-range of bushfire threat. So this influences what building materials can be used. I chose highly durable and low maintenance materials, coupled with those that could provide us with a thermally comfortable home. Energy efficiency was a priority from the start. From my design experience, I wanted to ensure that we designed a house that was solar passive designed to ensure that we could bring in the cooling breezes, be shaded from the hot summer sun on the north. So I designed the home to be sectioned off with doors and placed high-performing windows to direct the cooling summer breezes, and built-in features to minimise energy consumption with renewable energy integration and servicing an electric vehicle. Water's managed with rainwater collection and low-flow fixtures. And finally, the building techniques we used are all about quality and longevity craftsmanship. One of the biggest comfort factors in this home is hidden in the walls and ceilings. High-quality, Australian-made insulation bats. I chose high levels of glasswool insulation for the walls and ceiling and under roof lining. It includes up to 80% recycled glass, whilst being durable enough to last for decades without constant maintenance. They've got a high R value, so the house stays warm in winter and cool in summer, which means we have limited need for using the heating and the cooling systems. Kim, how do you address common misconceptions about insulation amongst homeowners?
That's a really interesting question, and it's a conversation I have with friends as well. I think it's understanding that insulation is, in the whole scheme of things, a really small cost in the whole of the build. But it's a fundamental aspect about keeping the house temperate, reducing costs to operate the house, etc. So I'll even give you an example of friends who I've literally gone into their roofs for them and installed the insulation physically before they've gone thinking about cooling and heating. The other aspect is the quality of the installation. And in fact, I was just on site nitpicking a little bit that it needs to be well packed and to every edge. So you need to fill those gaps, etc. Certainly the thickness and the performance of the insulation itself is really important. But if it's not installed properly, then you're going to have a number of weak spots.
Can you share the environmental benefits of using insulation made with high volumes of recycled glass?
Well, it's sort of a no-brainer, really. The idea that 80%, up to 80% of insulation bats are made with recycled glass is fantastic. You know, it's not contributing to landfill by just having glass dumped everywhere, and really just in terms of sustainability, it's another layer by which it's contributing to the environment and better outcomes.
So we also know that these insulation bats can last for well over 50 years. There's a lot of research that that's the case. So why is that important?
Well, because it's a hidden part of the building that won't be seen for ages. And that's often a problem in construction, that if you've got something that's hidden and it starts to break down and not perform, you often don't know. So that's a fantastic aspect of it, absolutely, yeah.
We've heard about research in Europe that has gone into homes 80 years old that actually have insulation, and it's still exactly the same, performs the same way as it was when it was actually manufactured.
Yeah.
Which is quite incredible,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's fantastic. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about that circularity of, building material life cycle. Yeah. So how exactly does insulation improve a home's energy performance?
Well, it comes down to the idea of R values and resistance to thermal transfer or heat transfer. So the higher an R value, the more resistant it is to a heat transfer. So it means that if you're heating your house in winter, particularly in colder climates, there's less likelihood of that heat escaping to outside where it's cooler. Vice versa, in summer, if it's really hot outside, it's going to resist that heat coming into the house when you're trying to keep cooler.
And what types of insulation do you recommend for optimal performance? And so there's, we've got acoustic, we've got thermal, and also we've got fire as well. So
there's a combination that we use, and we obviously have to prioritise depending on particular uses. Generally, we use a lot of thermal insulation, and that's usually glass wool bats. Often we'll use acoustic insulation in certain circumstances where we've talked about, floor transfer sound or sound between bathrooms and bedrooms or bedrooms to bedrooms. It's a little bit denser, a little bit more expensive, so it doesn't tend to be the insulation we use everywhere. It's also this whole idea of the combination of things. So when you say fire, it can be that it's being used for a fire-resistant property as well, but that's usually in combination with a whole series of materials. And that's where speaking to manufacturers is so important to us, because it's that combination of materials coming together that helps us get the best performance out of it. There's also other insulation we use under floors in concrete slabs. And because of the nature of putting a concrete slab together, it tends to be the more solid, rigid boards. They're not quite as high performing as the open sort of glass wool bats, but they're suitable for that sort of circumstance where the ground plane is contained, and we're also dealing with something that's about to be poured on it, and so it has to resist that weight of the concrete as it's poured on.
Yes. What are the long-term benefits in Australian-made insulation?
Well, it's supporting local industry, obviously jobs, etc. It also means you've got people in Australia contributing to the dialogue and certainly contributing to Australian standards and codes of ethics and codes of material usage that we need to have to make sure we've got the most effective buildings.
Yeah. Certainly, a lot of the manufacturers are involved in those standards because they're involved in the development of standards for material performance, but also the testing of those materials as well. So we're ensuring that there is products that are measured and assessed against the various Australian standards are all being measured on a level playing field, which is really, really important.
Very, yeah. So Janine, what about products that are Code Mark certified?
Well, that's a really good question, Kim. In Australia, we've got a program run out of the Australian Building Codes Board, which is called Code Mark. And it's a voluntary approach where a performance solution might be developed for a building system, but also some companies, like Australian manufacturers of insulation bats, use Code Mark as a voluntary approach to demonstrate their assurance for performing a quality outcome of their products day in, day out. So there's no golden sampling. So the products that they manufacture are consistently produced every single day. And so that the customer knows that what they're buying is to a quality standard. And it's really, really important. And so how you can find out if a product is Code Mark certified is you go onto a website called Jazz Ants, and you go onto their register and you look for insulation and you find out which companies actually have Code Mark certification. Can you explain how insulation keeps heating and cooling costs to a minimum?
Well, essentially what it does is maintains almost a temperate climate inside. So it reduces that impact of the winter cold coming in and the summer heat coming in. So it means that you don't need to be running your heating and cooling systems as long. In fact, you can be adjusting the temperatures so that it stays at a comfortable rather than making it escalate and try and fight against whatever temperature is outside. So it means overall that your systems are running less in terms of time, they're running at a less forced sort of condition, and it just means overall you're saving a lot of money. So it keeps down the wear and tear on appliances as well.
Does insulation also improve functionality in a home?
No, absolutely. So it makes it really comfortable in terms of thermal performance, so people aren't sort of wasting their time doing other things to try and keep warm. But it's also great acoustically. It sort of reduces sound between rooms potentially and from external noises. And when installed correctly, it can reduce the condensation impacts that can happen in old homes particularly, and humidity issues and particularly mould.
Just on that issue about acoustic comfort as well, because we've got an area downstairs and we didn't have much insulation between the two floors, we actually put in blow-in glasswool, blow-in rock wool insulation as well, to help compensate for that, and that really reduced the noise transfer between the
particularly when you've got timber floors.
Yes.
It helps enormously.
How does Australian manufacturers influence the effectiveness of insulation in architecture?
Well, they're always keeping up to code. They're making products that are suitable for our environment, be it in the south of Australia where we tend to get a lot of cool weather, or up north where it's humid and hot. Obviously, there's low carbon miles in them manufacturing offshore and then having to ship it all in and out, etc. The other aspect, I think, is that they use recycled materials, so it's really good for the environment in that way. We're sort of not putting things into landfill. And they're also on call for details and installation sort of information that we need when we might be encountering a different scenario than normal.
What are the key benefits of using thermal imaging for assessing insulation performance and quality?
Well, it goes back to that point I made about installation, that when you use thermal imaging, you can see if there's any weak spots in the house where particularly they haven't quite closed the gaps. And yes, they've put the insulation in between studs, but there's enormous gaps, often between the window frames and the stud frames. So we're finding people are much more conscious of doing that. The thermal imaging helps show exactly where the heat loss is, because it does this imaging that's really strong for where the insulation's working, and then a completely different strong colour for where it's not working at all. So it highlights where you need to actually fix up some of those flaws.
Kim, it's been really fantastic to speak to you today with your insights into sustainability and particularly about the importance of including insulation in homes and buildings more broadly. So really appreciate your time. So Kim Irons from Stonehouse and Irons Architecture. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Janine. I've learned a bit myself.